She was just the maid, a virgin, alone, invisible. But that night, she knelt before the millionaire and made a request that would change their lives forever. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. The silence in Blackwood Manor had its own texture. Thick as velvet, heavy as morning, it settled through the hallways of Carrara marble with the familiarity of a ghost who knows every shadow of its dwelling. It was in this silence that Rebecca lived, moving like an apparition among crystal chandeliers and Venetian mirrors that reflected a distant New York City below, through windows framed by French silk curtains. At 28, she had become a master in the art of not existing. Her steps were whispers across marble floors. Her hands glided over antique furniture without leaving traces, and her presence seemed to dissolve in the lavender-scented air that she herself spread throughout the rooms. It was as if she had made a pact with invisibility itself, a silent agreement that she would remain in the background of life, observing but never participating. The mansion was a sleeping monster in the heart of the Upper East Side, its 3 floors rising like a secular cathedral, dedicated to luxury and melancholy. Rebecca knew each of its secrets: the specific creak of the mahogany staircase on the 13th step, the particular echo that voices acquired in the main hall, the way afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows on the 2nd floor, creating colorful mosaics on walls covered with European tapestries. It was her world, her limited universe, her gilded prison. She had arrived there 2 years before, bringing only a small worn leather suitcase and a letter of recommendation that didn't even mention her past. The woman who hired her, a severe silver-haired lady who managed the property in the master's absence, had asked only 3 questions. Did she know how to clean without breaking valuable objects? Could she keep secrets? And was she willing to live like a ghost? All 3 answers were yes. And since then, Rebecca had become part of the furniture, as essential as she was invisible. The lavender scent that accompanied her wasn't perfume, but an almost spiritual necessity. It was the smell of peace she desperately sought, the last vestige of a promise made to her dying mother in a public hospital bed in Newark. "Stay pure, my little girl," the woman had whispered with lips dried by chemotherapy that hadn't managed to defeat cancer. "Your purity is a sacred gift. Don't let the world corrupt you as it corrupted me." And Rebecca had promised, with hot tears streaming down her face, that she would guard that purity like a treasure, that she would never allow strange hands to profane the temple of her body. But promises made in desperation sometimes transform into shackles that imprison more than they protect. Her routine was meticulous as a ritual. She woke at 5, when the mansion still breathed in the last sighs of dawn. She prepared her own coffee in a kitchen that looked like it came from an architectural magazine, with its noble wood cabinets and black granite countertops that reflected her face like dark mirrors. Then she began cleaning the 1st floor, always working in an upward movement as if climbing a mountain of responsibilities. The 1st floor was neutral territory. Living rooms that nobody frequented, a library with thousands of books in various languages that she sometimes dared to touch with her fingertips, a secondary office used only for formal meetings. It was there that she felt safest, far from the private quarters that housed the true secrets of the house. The 2nd floor was different. It was the domain of a ghost she knew only in glimpses. There was a room at the end of the corridor that had remained locked since her arrival, its double oak doors sealed like a tomb. Nobody spoke about it, but Rebecca knew by the way the other staff averted their eyes when passing by that this room held a story that should not be told. And there was the 3rd floor, the master's quarters, a territory she avoided as if it were a minefield. In the 2 years she had worked there, Rebecca had seen Nathan Blackwood only in photographs scattered throughout the house, a man with sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world, black hair always impeccably combed. In older photos, beside a blonde woman with a radiant smile, he looked different, younger, as if the light had not yet completely gone out in his soul. Now, at 42, he was an urban legend in his own home. He arrived late at night, when she had already retired to the small ground floor room assigned to her. He left before dawn, leaving only the ghost of his expensive perfume, something between sandalwood and leather, lingering in the air. She sometimes heard his footsteps, heavy and deliberate on the floor above, like a giant walking over their heads. The other staff whispered stories about him with the reverence reserved for myths. They said he had been unable to smile since he became a widower, that his lovers lasted only one night and left in the morning with eyes red from crying. They told that he possessed an incalculable fortune, inherited from a logistics empire that stretched from Europe to North America, but that all that money had not been able to buy him a minute of happiness. Rebecca absorbed these stories like someone collecting fragments of a puzzle she never intended to complete. It wasn't curiosity she felt, but a kind of distant fascination, as if she was studying a rare species through the bars of a zoo. He was the predator, she was the prey, and the distance between them was the only thing that maintained the balance of that delicate ecosystem. Until one Tuesday afternoon, while polishing the mirrors in the main hall, she began to hum. It was an old song, something her mother used to hum during the few moments of peace they had in the community where she grew up. A simple melody, almost childish, that sprang from her lips without her noticing, as if it were the natural soundtrack of her soul. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the main hall, it echoed with a melancholic sweetness that transformed the space. Rebecca didn't know she was being watched. 3 floors above, behind the heavy curtains of his private office, Nathan Blackwood had interrupted a video conference with Japanese investors to approach the internal window overlooking the hall. There was something different in the air of the house, an almost imperceptible disturbance in the established order that bothered him like a stone in his shoe. Then he heard the song. Nathan stood motionless, still holding the phone he had just abruptly hung up, leaving dozens of executives talking to themselves on the other side of the world. There was something in that voice that struck him like a sharp knife, not for the pain it caused, but for the surgical precision with which it found a part of him he thought dead and buried. It was impossible that a simple employee, a woman whose name he didn't even know, could awaken anything in his ossified chest. But there he was, holding his breath like a teenager spying on his first love. He descended the marble stairs with careful steps, his custom-made Italian shoes not making the slightest sound on the floor. He positioned himself at the threshold between the hall and the side corridor, hidden by the shadows that the architecture of the house created purposefully, and observed. She was smaller than he had imagined from the quick glimpses he'd had through the security cameras. Delicate, almost ethereal, dressed in a simple uniform that seemed to have been chosen specifically to camouflage any trace of femininity. But there was something in her movements, a natural grace that not even the shapeless clothes could disguise, that caught Nathan's gaze like a magnet. Her brown hair was tied in a low bun, some rebellious strands escaping to frame a face he could only see in profile. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and she moved with an almost religious concentration, as if that mundane task of polishing mirrors were a sacred act. And she continued humming. Nathan leaned against the wall, feeling something strange happening in his chest. It wasn't desire, at least not the kind of desire he knew, urgent and easily satisfied. It was something more disturbing, a curiosity that was born not from the body, but from a deeper and more dangerous place. He wanted to know who this woman was, who could bring music to a house that for 6 years had known only silence. Rebecca finished polishing the last mirror and stepped back to admire the result. It was at that moment that she felt it, a presence, eyes on her. The kind of primitive sensation that made the hairs on her arms stand up and her heart race for no apparent reason. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the space behind her, but found only shadows and furniture covered with white cloths. Even so, the sensation persisted. She gathered her cleaning materials quickly, her heart beating erratically against her ribs. There was nothing there, she knew that rationally, but her instinct screamed otherwise. There was something, someone observing her every movement, with an intensity she could feel on her skin like the heat of a nearby fire. She left the hall almost running, her footsteps echoing for the first time in 2 years of silent walks. Nathan remained hidden until the sound of her steps was lost in the depths of the house. Only then did he allow himself to emerge from the shadows, walking to the exact spot where she had been moments before. The scent of lavender still hung in the air, more intense there, as if she had left a part of herself imprinted in the space. He approached the mirror she had just polished. His own image stared back at him, a 42-year-old man who seemed to carry 60, dark eyes surrounded by lines of weariness, black hair where silver strands were beginning to appear at the temples. He was no longer the man he had once been, the one who smiled in the photographs, scattered throughout the house. That man had died with Elaine 6 years ago, when she chose the 3rd floor of the mansion as the stage for her final act of despair. But for a moment, just one, while listening to that song, something inside him had stirred, something he thought definitively buried along with his wife. This haunted him more than it should. In the days that followed, Nathan found himself paying attention to details that previously went unnoticed. The sound of footsteps on the lower floor during his interminable calls, the scent of lavender that rose up the stairs like a perfumed ghost, the small signs that she had been in a certain place, a flower arrangement slightly different, a cushion repositioned with more care than the other employees usually showed. He began to consult the security camera system with a frequency that bordered on obsession. Not for protection concerns, the mansion was an impenetrable bunker in the heart of New York, but to observe her, to try to understand the puzzle she represented. He discovered that she always woke at the same time, that she took her coffee alone in the kitchen, while reading books she secretly withdrew from the library, that sometimes she stopped in the middle of work to touch the petals of flowers with an almost reverential delicacy. He discovered that she avoided the 2nd floor whenever possible, that her eyes automatically averted from the locked door at the end of the corridor, as if she instinctively knew that a tragedy dwelled there. He discovered that she hummed whenever she felt safe and alone, and he discovered that he needed to hear her again. The opportunity arose on a rainy Thursday, when the sound of the storm outside created a symphony of drums against the mansion's windows. Nathan had cancelled all his appointments for the day, something he never did, claiming a headache that didn't even exist. In truth, he couldn't concentrate on anything other than the woman who lived under his roof like a secret kept by himself. He went down to the 1st floor at the time he knew she would be in the library, organizing the books that someone in the family had disorganized during one of the rare social visits. He again positioned himself in the shadows, like an emotional voyeur, and waited. She appeared punctually, carrying a tray with cleaning products that clearly wouldn't be used. Nathan smiled for the first time in months when he realized that she also used cleaning as an excuse to spend time among the books. There was something profoundly human in that small, silent rebellion, something that touched him in an unexpected way. Rebecca began to work, but her eyes couldn't leave the shelves filled with classic literature. Nathan saw her pick up a copy of 100 Years of Solitude, caress the cover with her fingertips, open it and inhale the smell of old paper as if it were an addiction. And then she began to hum again. This time it was a different song, more melancholic, which she murmured in Spanish while leafing through the book. Nathan was hypnotized not only by the voice, but by the complete image. A woman who found beauty and music amid the cold luxury of his house, who transformed stolen moments into small acts of poetic resistance. It was when he realized that he didn't just desire her physically, he wanted to possess her completely. Rebecca began to have strange dreams. Dreams where she walked through the corridors of the mansion and felt invisible eyes following her every movement, where voices whispered her name through the marble walls, where phantom hands touched her shoulders with a familiarity that made her wake with a start, her heart racing and skin damp with sweat. They weren't exactly nightmares. They were something worse. They were dreams that left her with a feeling of emptiness when she awoke, as if she were losing something important by returning to reality. During the day, the sensation of being watched intensified. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, checking shadows that danced in the corners of her peripheral vision, stopping in the middle of tasks to listen for noises that might be just the wind, or might be careful footsteps moving away whenever she paid attention. The mansion seemed to have developed a life of its own, breathing around her with a consciousness that didn't exist before. The mirrors reflected not only her image, but an uneasiness that grew each day. The flowers she arranged wilted faster, as if they absorbed the tension that hung in the air. Even the lavender scent she spread throughout the room seemed different, more intense, more charged with expectation. It was on a Saturday morning that she decided to break her own rules. Nathan had traveled to a meeting in Washington, D.C. that would last the entire weekend. Rebecca knew this because she had heard the housekeeper comment to the driver about the need to prepare the house for his absence. It was the first time in 2 years that she was absolutely certain she was alone in the mansion, without the ghostly presence of the master hovering over her head. The temporary freedom intoxicated her like strong wine. She went up to the second floor. Her bare feet made no sound on the Persian rug that covered the corridor. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, creating colorful patterns on the walls, covered with portraits of ancestors dead for centuries. It was quieter there. A different silence from the rest of the house, denser, more charged with history and secrets. Rebecca walked slowly down the corridor, observing each detail she had never allowed herself to notice. There was a palpable melancholy impregnated in each object, each piece of furniture, each painting hung on the walls. It was as if that floor were a mausoleum dedicated to a life that had been abruptly interrupted. And then she reached the locked door. It was at the end of the corridor, isolated from the others by a small hall of its own, as if it were a separate sanctuary. The double doors of dark oak seemed heavier than the others, more definitive. There was no key in the lock, but Rebecca knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that the key existed and was nearby. She searched for a few minutes until she found it hanging on a discreet hook behind a small painting on the adjacent wall. The key was old, ornate, made of a metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It weighed in her hands like a responsibility. Rebecca hesitated for a long moment, the key trembling between her fingers. She knew she was about to cross a line that shouldn't be crossed, to invade a territory that didn't belong to her. But something stronger than reason drove her forward, a morbid curiosity that grew in her chest like a poisonous plant. She inserted the key in the lock and turned it. The click of the mechanism echoed down the corridor like a gunshot. The door opened with a low moan, revealing a room shrouded in shadow. The heavy curtains were closed, blocking almost all natural light, and the air carried a smell of mildew and dried roses, as if time had stopped in there years ago. Rebecca entered slowly, her eyes gradually adapting to the darkness. Gradually the shapes began to define themselves, a canopied double bed, covered with white sheets that were already yellowing at the edges, a dressing table full of perfume bottles still half full, a wardrobe ajar, revealing dresses that seemed to be waiting for an owner who would never return. It was the room of a dead woman. But it wasn't just that. It was a sanctuary preserved exactly as it had been left on the day of the tragedy. There was a half-finished cup of coffee on the bedside table, a book open with a page marked by a dried rose, letters scattered over the desk as if they had been abandoned in the middle of reading. Rebecca approached the letters, her heart beating erratically. She shouldn't be there, shouldn't touch anything, but her fingers moved of their own volition, touching the paper yellowed by time. The letters were all addressed to Elaine, written in a masculine and nervous handwriting that she recognized even though she had never seen it before. It was Nathan's handwriting. "My dear Elaine," one of them read, "I need you to understand that we cannot have this child now. My father's will is clear about the conditions of the inheritance, and an heir born before our 5th year of marriage would put everything at risk. You know how much our family means to me, how much our lineage represents. I cannot allow centuries of history to be destroyed by an accident of timing." Rebecca dropped the letter as if she had been burned. Her hands trembled violently as the fragments of the tragedy reorganized in her mind like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The wife had not died of illness or accident. She had killed herself. And she had killed herself because the man who claimed to love her had chosen money and family tradition over the life of his own child. Nausea rose in Rebecca's throat like bitter bile. She backed away from the desk, stumbling, bumping into the dressing table, and knocking over some perfume bottles that shattered on the floor like crystals of a shattered dream. The scent of roses and jasmine spread throughout the room, too intense after years concentrated in the stagnant air. That was when she heard the door closing behind her. She turned quickly and found Nathan standing in the doorway, the key still in his hand, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger, it wasn't surprise. It was something more complex, a mixture of resignation and something that seemed dangerously close to relief. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice lacked the authority the words demanded. Rebecca leaned against the dressing table, her legs trembling. I didn't know you had returned. I cancelled the trip. Nathan took a step into the room, completely closing the door behind him. I had a strange feeling, as if something important was going to happen here. Silence stretched between them, dense and charged with tension. Rebecca could smell his perfume mixed with the old scent of the room, creating a disturbing combination of present and past, life and death. "You read the letters," said Nathan. "It wasn't a question. I didn't want to. It wasn't my intention. But you read them." He took another step closer. "And now you know who I really am." Rebecca raised her chin in a gesture of defiance that surprised them both. "I know that you're a man who killed his wife without dirtying his own hands." Nathan stopped midway as if she had slapped him. For a moment something crossed his face. Pain, remorse, perhaps even shame. But it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of studied indifference. "Elaine killed herself by her own choice," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I merely showed her the consequences of her decisions." "Consequences?" Rebecca's voice rose an octave. "You asked her to kill her own child. I asked her to choose between a life of misery and a life of privilege. Between destroying a centuries-old family lineage or preserving our future." Nathan took another step toward her. "She chose drama." The coldness in his voice cut Rebecca like a blade. She instinctively backed away, bumping into the dressing table again, and this time her hand found something cold and pointed. She looked down and saw a broken pearl necklace, the beads scattered like crystallized tears. "This was hers," murmured Nathan, observing the necklace in Rebecca's hands. "She wore it on the day she died." Rebecca immediately dropped the necklace, the pearls rolling across the floor with a sound that echoed through the room like rain on a tomb. But Nathan bent down and collected some of the beads, holding them in the palm of his hand as if they were sacred relics. "You're afraid of me now," he said, raising his eyes to meet hers. Rebecca swallowed hard. "Should I be?" Nathan smiled, but there was no joy in that smile. "Probably." And then he did something she would never have expected. He extended his hand offering the pearls. "But I won't hurt you," he said softly. "On the contrary. I think you might be exactly what this house needs." Rebecca looked at the pearls in Nathan's outstretched hand, as if they were snakes about to bite her. There was something deeply disturbing about the offer, a forced intimacy that made her feel as if she were being dragged into a game whose rules she didn't understand. The pearly beads gleamed faintly in the half-light of the room, each one carrying the memory of a woman who had preferred death to compromise. "I can't accept that," she whispered, taking another step back. "Why not?" Nathan tilted his head slightly, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see through her soul. "They're just stones. Beautiful stones, but still just stones." "They're not just stones." Rebecca's voice came out firmer than she expected. "They're the last thing she touched before jumping." Nathan stood motionless for a moment, the pearls still offered in his open palm. Then slowly, he closed his hand and put the beads in his jacket pocket. "You're right," he said with a softness that dangerously contrasted with his previous coldness. "I apologize." It wasn't appropriate. The apology caught her off guard. There was a genuine vulnerability in his voice that didn't match the image of the cold, calculating man the letters revealed. Rebecca found herself studying his face in the half-light, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation, but finding only a complexity that disconcerted her. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked suddenly. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "I didn't bring you. You invaded." "No, I meant—" Rebecca gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the room but the whole situation. "Why do you keep me here?" "In the mansion. There are dozens of cleaning companies in New York. Why an employee who lives in the house?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Nathan approached the window and slightly pulled one of the curtains, allowing a beam of golden light to cut through the half-light. The contrast highlighted the angles of his face, making him both more beautiful and more dangerous. "Because this house was dying," he finally said. "There was so much silence here that I was beginning to forget what the sounds of life were like. Then you arrived with your presence, your small noises, your rituals, your scent of lavender. You brought something I thought I had lost forever." "What?" Nathan turned to face her directly. "The feeling that I'm still alive. The words hit Rebecca like an intimate confession, carrying a pain so deep that she could almost touch it. For a moment, she glimpsed behind the mask of indifference a deeply wounded man, someone who had isolated himself so much from the world that he had forgotten what it was like to feel anything beyond emptiness. "That's not healthy," she said softly. "You can't use a person to feel alive." "No?" Nathan took a step toward her and then another. "And what have you been doing with me, Rebecca? Because I know you watch me too." Her heart raced at hearing her name on his lips. It was the first time he had pronounced it, and there was an intimacy in the way the syllables rolled off his tongue that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, as if he had just stripped away a layer of her soul. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Nathan was too close now, close enough for her to see the small scars on his face, close enough to feel the heat emanating from his body. "You stop working when you feel I'm nearby. Your steps change rhythm when I pass through the corridors. Yesterday you dropped a vase in the hall when I unexpectedly came down the stairs." Rebecca felt her face heat up. He was right, of course he was. She had developed an acute awareness of his presence, as if she had grown special antennas tuned exclusively to his frequency. But admitting this would be admitting something that not even she was ready to accept. "That doesn't mean anything," she murmured. "Doesn't it?" Nathan slowly extended his hand, giving her time to move away if she wanted, and lightly touched her face. His fingers were surprisingly warm against her cold skin. "Then why are you trembling?" Rebecca instinctively closed her eyes at his touch, and it was a mistake. Without the distraction of vision, all other sensations intensified. His smell closer now, a mixture of expensive cologne and something indefinably masculine. The sound of his breathing slightly accelerated, the warmth of his hand against her face, a warmth that spread through her body like whiskey going down her throat. "I made a promise," she whispered, the words coming out like a painful confession. "What kind of promise?" Rebecca opened her eyes and met his, so close that she could see her own reflection in his dark pupils. "To my mother, before she died, I promised that I would keep my purity, that I wouldn't let any man touch me in the way you want to touch me." Nathan became very still, his hand still on her face. "And you intend to keep that promise?" "I intended to." The admission came out like a defeated sigh. "Until I met you." Something changed in Nathan's expression. The mask of control slipped for a moment, revealing a mixture of triumph, desire, and something that could have been tenderness if she didn't know what he was capable of. "Rebecca," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "You know what kind of man I am. You read the letters. You know what I did to Elaine. I'm not the kind of man who saves princesses or offers happy endings. I know." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "And I'm not the kind of woman who seeks salvation. But there's something about you, something that makes me want to break all the promises I've ever made." Nathan closed his eyes as if he were suffering. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do." Rebecca moved closer until their bodies almost touched. "I'm asking you to show me what it's like to feel, what it's like to be a woman, not just a child haunted by promises made in desperation. So I'm asking you to teach me what my body can feel." And after that, his voice came out hoarse, charged with a tension that made the air between them vibrate like a violin string stretched to the limit. "After I touch you, after I make you mine, what happens when you regret it? When the guilt comes, and it always comes, what will you do?" Rebecca hesitated for only a second. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know I'll regret it more if I don't try. If I spend the rest of my life wondering what it would have been like." Nathan opened his eyes and studied her for a long moment. She could see the war being waged in his mind, the struggle between the desire to possess her and something that might have been a last vestige of moral conscience. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he finally asked. "I'm sure." The answer came out firm, decisive, without hesitation. Nathan backed away slightly, creating space between them. "Then it won't be here. Not in this room. Elaine already haunts this place enough." He headed for the door, but stopped before opening it, looking over his shoulder. "If you change your mind, if reason returns, I'll understand. But if you want to go forward with this, if you really want me to teach you what your body can feel, come to my office tonight, at midnight." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Rebecca alone in the haunted room, surrounded by the smell of dead roses, and the echo of a promise she knew would change her life forever. She remained motionless for a long time, watching dust particles dance in the beam of light still entering through the partially open curtain. She knew she had crossed an invisible line, that there was no going back. The woman who would leave that room would not be the same one who had entered. And for the first time in her life, this didn't frighten her. It excited her. The hall clock marked 11:52 when Rebecca left her ground floor room. She had spent the last hours in a trance-like state, alternating between moments of absolute determination and waves of panic that made her question her mental sanity. She had taken 3 showers, changed clothes 4 times, and now walked through the dark corridors dressed in a simple white cotton dress that had belonged to her mother. The choice of clothing hadn't been accidental. It was the dress she had worn to the funeral, the last tangible vestige of her previous life, and wearing it that night seemed appropriate. It was as if she were definitively burying the girl she had been to give birth to the woman she had chosen to become. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold marble. The mansion slept around her, shrouded in shadows that seemed to move and breathe with a life of their own. The windows filtered the light of the full moon outside, creating silver patterns on the Persian rugs and making the crystals of the chandeliers shine like captured stars. Rebecca climbed the stairs with the solemnity of a bride walking toward the altar, each step a conscious choice to embrace the unknown. There was no more hesitation in her movements, only a determination that was born from the depths of her soul, a desire so primitive and true that it silenced any rational protest. The 3rd floor was unexplored territory. She had never been there, and the atmosphere was different from the rest of the house. More personal, more intimate. The smell of Nathan's perfume permeated the air, mixed with the aroma of leather from books and expensive cigars. It was the wolf's lair, and she was voluntarily walking into the den. The office door was ajar, a sliver of golden light escaping through the opening like a silent invitation. Rebecca stopped before it, her hand suspended in the air for a moment that seemed eternal. She knew that once she crossed that threshold, there would be no going back. The woman who would enter that room would not be the same one who would leave. She pushed the door gently. Nathan had his back to her, standing before the window that overlooked the gardens bathed in moonlight. He wore only dark silk pants and a white shirt, with the first few buttons undone, his feet bare on the oriental rug that covered part of the fine wood floor. There was something deeply masculine and predatory in his posture, like a feline waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. "You came," he said without turning, his low voice echoing through the office lined with ancient books. "I said I would." Rebecca closed the door behind her, the click of the lock sounding definitive in the quietness of the room. Many women say many things. Nathan turned slowly, his eyes scanning every detail of her, with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being undressed by his gaze alone. Few have the courage to keep what they promise. "I'm not many women." "No." A smile touched his lips but didn't reach his eyes. "You definitely are not." The office was an extension of Nathan's personality, luxurious, somber, charged with history. Mahogany bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes in various languages. A fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with paintings by old masters. The air carried the smell of whiskey and aged paper, a combination that somehow perfectly defined the man before her. "Are you afraid?" he asked, approaching with slow, deliberate steps. Rebecca thought about the question for a moment. "I am," she admitted honestly, "but not of you." "Of what then?" "Of myself. Of what I might discover about myself tonight." Nathan stopped right in front of her, close enough for her to feel the heat emanating from his body, close enough to see the small scars that marked his hands, silent witnesses to a life she could only imagine. "Rebecca," he said, his voice charged with a seriousness that made her raise her eyes to meet his. "Last chance. If you leave now, I'll pretend none of this happened. You'll return to your room, continue being the invisible employee, and I'll respect that. But if you stay, if you stay, you'll be mine. Not for one night, not until you tire of me. You'll be mine until I decide I no longer want you. And when that day comes, and it always comes, you will leave without protests, without tears, without demanding explanations. Do you accept these terms?" The proposal was brutal in its honesty, devoid of any romanticization or empty promise. It was an emotional contract where she would give everything and he would guarantee nothing in return except temporary pleasure and an inevitable farewell. It was exactly the kind of agreement that would destroy any woman who still believed in fairy tales, but Rebecca hadn't believed in fairy tales for a long time. "I accept," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. Nathan studied her for a long moment, looking for signs of hesitation or regret. When he found none, he took a step back and gestured toward the center of the room. "Then kneel." The words hit Rebecca like an electric shock. It wasn't what she expected. It wasn't how she had imagined this would begin, but there was something in the authority of his voice, something that awakened a primitive part of her she didn't know existed, that made her obey without questioning. Slowly, gracefully, she knelt on the oriental rug. The fabric was soft against her knees, but there was an underlying hardness that reminded her of her vulnerability. She kept her hands resting on her thighs and her gaze fixed on his, refusing to show submission beyond what was necessary. "Why are you doing this?" asked Nathan, circling around her like a predator evaluating its prey. "Because I want to," she answered simply. "No, that's not the complete truth." He stopped behind her, and Rebecca felt his fingers lightly touch her hair. "Why are you really here, Rebecca? What are you seeking?" The question forced her to dive deeper into herself, to look for motivations she had buried under layers of rationalization. "I want to feel," she finally said, her voice coming out as a sigh. "My whole life has been controlled by other people. First by the community where I grew up, then by the promise I made to my mother, then by fear. I want one night where the choices are mine, where I can discover who I really am when no one is telling me who I should be. And if you discover you don't like what you find—" Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling his fingers entangle in her hair. "Then at least I'll know the truth." Nathan knelt behind her, his hands sliding over her shoulders and down her arms in a caress so gentle it seemed almost reverent. "You're so young," he murmured against her ear. "So desperately young. I'm 28. Not in experience. In experience, you're 16. Maybe less." His lips brushed her neck, drawing an involuntary shiver. "Are you sure you want it to be me who changes you?" "I'm not a gentle man, Rebecca. I'm not patient or kind. I'm selfish and possessive, and when I want something, I take it without caring about the consequences." "I know." Rebecca tilted her head to the side, offering more of her neck to his lips. "That's exactly why I chose you." Nathan laughed softly, a laugh that vibrated against her skin like a purr. "So you chose me. It wasn't I who seduced you." "You noticed me," she corrected. "But it was I who decided to come here tonight. It was I who chose to break my promise. It was I who decided that I wanted to know the taste of sin." "The taste of sin." Nathan repeated the words as if they were a rare delicacy. "You speak like the nun you never became." "Maybe that's what I am. A renegade nun in search of her fall." "Then," said Nathan, his hands finding the collar of her dress, "let me be your damnation." The buttons of the dress opened one by one under his skilled fingers, each of them releasing not just fabric, but layers of repression and fear that had enveloped Rebecca throughout her life. The dress slid off her shoulders like water, pooling around her knees in a puddle of white cotton that seemed to symbolize the purity she was about to lose. Nathan paused, his hands suspended in the air, and Rebecca could feel his eyes traveling over every inch of exposed skin. "Last chance," he said, his voice hoarse with contained desire. Rebecca turned to face him, still kneeling, but now with a courage that came from somewhere deep in her soul. "There will be no more chances," she said. "Just this one, just now. Just us." And then she did something that surprised them both. She extended her hands and began to unbutton his shirt. The morning that followed that night arrived differently for Rebecca. It wasn't just the sunlight that awakened her, but a new awareness of her own body, a heightened sensitivity that made each fiber of fabric against her skin seem more intense, each breath deeper. It was as if she had been sleeping for 28 years and had finally awakened to discover that she possessed a body capable of feeling pleasure. Nathan had left before dawn, as he always did, but this time he had left something different in the air. It wasn't just his perfume impregnated in the sheets where she had awakened, his room, not hers, a transgression that still made her blush, but a subtle change in the atmosphere of the house. as if the mansion itself knew that something fundamental had changed within its walls. Rebecca rose slowly, each movement a rediscovery. There was a lightness in her steps that didn't exist before, but also a new weight in her chest. Not of guilt as she had expected, but of responsibility. She had chosen this consciously, had demanded this, and now she needed to deal with the consequences of her own courage. The reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. The same brown eyes, the same pale skin, the same hair disheveled by sleep. But there was something different in her posture, in the way she held her chin, in the gleam that illuminated her gaze. It was as if a locked door inside her had finally been opened, revealing rooms she didn't even know existed. She went down to the kitchen as she always did, prepared coffee as she always did, but nothing was as it had always been. Each routine act now carried a memory of the previous hours, echoes of Nathan's hands on her skin, of the hoarse sound of his voice whispering her name like a profane prayer. That was when she found the letter. It had been slipped under the back door, a simple envelope of brown paper with no identification. Rebecca picked it up with trembling hands, a cold premonition rising up her spine like melting ice. She knew that type of paper, that rough texture that the community where she grew up used for all official correspondence. She opened it with fingers that were already trembling before reading the first words. Rebecca, our lost daughter. We know where you are. We know what you've done. The purity you promised to protect has been stained by the hands of a man who doesn't know God. But our mercy is great, and our door is still open. Come home before it's too late. Come back before your soul is definitively lost in the arms of sin. We have news about your mother that might change your perspective on promises made in desperation. We're waiting for you, as we've always waited. Brother Samuel. The words danced before her eyes like venomous snakes. Brother Samuel, the leader of the community, the man who had controlled every aspect of her childhood and adolescence with an iron fist disguised as paternal love. The man from whom she had fled on a rainy night 3 years ago, taking only a suitcase and a courage she didn't know she possessed. How had they found her address? How did they know about Nathan? And, more importantly, what news did they have about her mother that could make a difference now? Rebecca crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash, but immediately retrieved it. As much as she wanted to ignore it, she couldn't. There was something between the lines, a subtle threat that made her feel as if she were being watched through the kitchen windows. She put the letter in her apron pocket and tried to continue her routine, but the words echoed in her mind, like a sinister mantra. The day passed in slow motion. Every noise made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threatening presence. The paranoia she had learned to control during the first years after her escape was returning with full force, making her check locks, peer through curtains, jump at the slightest movement in her peripheral vision. Nathan arrived earlier that night, and Rebecca heard him climb the stairs with slower steps than usual. There was something different in his posture too, a tension that hadn't existed the previous morning. Was it regret? Discomfort with the intimacy they had shared? Or just the return of his natural personality after a moment of human weakness? She had prepared his dinner as she always did, but this time she personally went up to the 3rd floor to deliver it. It was a breach of protocol that would have been unthinkable 2 days before, but now it seemed not only appropriate but necessary. She found him in the office, standing before the same window where he had been the night before, but now there was a rigidity in his shoulders that didn't exist when he had been waiting for her. He didn't turn when she entered, just continued observing the gardens plunged into darkness. "You regret it," said Rebecca, placing the tray on the table. It wasn't a question. No. The answer came too quickly, too defensively. "Do you?" "No." She approached him but maintained a prudent distance. "But something has changed. I can feel it." Nathan finally turned to face her, and Rebecca saw that she was right. There was something different in his eyes, a distance that didn't exist when he whispered her name in the dark. "I received some information today," he said carefully. "About you." Rebecca's heart froze. "What kind of information?" "A man came to my office. He said he represented a religious community from upstate New York. He was asking about a young woman who had fled a few years ago, someone who might be working in family homes in the city." Nathan slowly approached her. as if she were a frightened animal ready to flee. Very precise description. Brown hair, light eyes, a birthmark on the left wrist. Rebecca instinctively covered her wrist with her right hand, but it was already too late. Nathan had seen the gesture. I told him I didn't know anything, of course, but I was curious. He stopped right in front of her, close enough to touch, but without doing so. "What other secrets do you keep, Rebecca?" "They're not secrets," she said defensively. "It's a past I prefer not to talk about. A past that's apparently looking for you." Nathan took something from the table behind him and extended it to her. It was a black and white photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed Rebecca leaving the mansion the previous morning, her face perfectly recognizable even at a distance. "They know where you are," Nathan said softly. "And from what I understood from the conversation, they don't intend to leave you in peace." Rebecca held the photograph with trembling hands. "They never leave me in peace. No matter where I go, they always find me. It's as if they had tentacles spread everywhere." What kind of community was this? The kind that believes women should be property of God or men, never of themselves. The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. The kind that uses faith as an excuse for control and isolation, as a method of spiritual purification. Nathan remained quiet for a long moment, processing the information. "And your mother was part of this?" "My mother was a victim like me." Rebecca swallowed the lump in her throat. "But when she was dying, afraid of what would happen to me after she was gone, she made me promise that I would maintain the purity they valued so much. She thought it would protect me. But it didn't protect you. It only imprisoned me in a different way." Rebecca looked at him with a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. "Until you." Nathan extended his hand and touched her face, the same gentle gesture from the night before. "And now? What do you intend to do?" "I don't know." The honesty hurt more than she expected. "I only know that I don't want to go back. I don't want to be again that frightened woman who lives in the shadows." "Then don't go back. It may not be a choice. Brother Samuel is not the kind of man who accepts no for an answer." Nathan smiled, but there was no humor in that expression. "Neither am I." There was an implicit promise in those words, a protection offered without words. But Rebecca knew that accepting this protection would come with a price, and she wasn't sure if she was prepared to pay it. "Nathan," she said softly, "you need to know that being with me could become dangerous. They won't simply give up. And if they discover that we what?" He moved closer, his hands finding her waist. "That you stopped being the holy virgin they wanted. That you chose sin instead of penance. They'll try to destroy you." Nathan laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed through the office like music. "Let them try. I have resources that your little sect never imagined. Money, influence, connections that can make anyone's life very difficult very quickly." But Rebecca shook her head. "You don't know them. They don't understand money or influence. They understand only fanatical conviction and infinite patience. They're like water. They always find a way around obstacles." "Then," said Nathan, pulling her closer, "we'll have to make sure there are no obstacles to be worked around." The weeks that followed were a dangerous dance between passion and paranoia. Nathan had installed additional cameras around the property and hired discreet security guards, but Rebecca still felt watched by eyes that technologies couldn't detect. The sensation of being hunted had become a constant shadow, following her through the corridors of the mansion like a ghost thirsty for vengeance. The nights, however, brought relief. In Nathan's arms, enveloped by the illusory safety of the third floor, Rebecca could temporarily forget the outside world. He had revealed himself to be a surprisingly attentive lover, someone who understood that true pleasure was born from total surrender, not from haste. His hands now knew every inch of her skin. His lips had mapped every sigh he could draw from her, and she had discovered that her body was capable of sensations she had never imagined possible. But there was something more between them beyond physical attraction. Nathan had begun to talk during the early hours, his defenses lowered after hours of intimacy. He told stories of his childhood in Europe, of a cold and calculating father who saw his children as pieces on a corporate chessboard, of a mother who had died when he was only 12, leaving him alone to navigate a world of impossible expectations. Elaine was different in the beginning, he said on one of those early mornings, while smoking a Cuban cigar by the window. Young, full of life, naive enough to believe that love could conquer everything. I fell in love with that. Naivety. Rebecca observed him from the bed, the silk sheets partially covering her body. What changed? I changed. Nathan took a long drag, the ember of the cigar glowing in the darkness. The marriage was arranged by our parents, but she believed we could build something real together. For a time I believed it too. But then my father died and I inherited not just the fortune, but all the responsibilities and obsessions that accompanied it. The clauses of the will. Among other things, he turned to face her. My father was a paranoid man, convinced that the family lineage needed to be preserved at any cost. The will wasn't just about money, but about blood, about continuity, about control even after death. Rebecca sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her chest. And Elaine got pregnant at the wrong time. Elaine got pregnant when she wanted, how she wanted. Nathan's voice acquired a hardness that Rebecca had learned to recognize. She knew the conditions. She knew that a child born before our 5th year of marriage would invalidate a large part of the inheritance. But she decided that her desires were more important than our future. She wanted to be a mother. She wanted to test me, to see if I would choose the family we could have or the fortune we already had. Nathan extinguished the cigar with unnecessary violence. I chose the fortune. The silence that followed was dense as black velvet. Rebecca could feel the pain radiating from Nathan like heat from an infected wound, but there was something else, a lack of remorse that deeply disturbed her. Do you regret it? She finally asked. Nathan took time to answer. I regret how it ended. I don't regret the choice. The coldness of the response cut Rebecca like a blade. For a moment, she glimpsed the man who had written those cruel letters, the man capable of valuing money above life. It was a necessary reminder that the man who touched her with such care was also capable of a calculated cruelty that she could barely comprehend. Does that frighten you? Asked Nathan, noticing her reaction. Should it? Can I? Probably. He returned to the bed, lying down beside her. But you're still here. I am. Rebecca turned to face him. Perhaps because I recognize in you something that's in me too. What? The capacity to make difficult choices, to put one's own survival above everything else. She touched his face gently. You chose fortune. I chose freedom. We both sacrificed people we loved to get what we wanted. Nathan captured her hand, kissing the palm. Your mother. My mother. The admission hurt more than Rebecca expected. She died believing I would keep the promise. She died in peace because she thought her daughter would be different from all the other women she knew, that I would be strong enough to resist the temptations of the world. And you resisted. For years. Until you, Rebecca smiled sadly. She would be devastated if she knew what I've become. What have you become? A woman who finally took control of her own life. A woman who broke a sacred promise to satisfy her own desires. The words came out charged with a guilt Rebecca thought she had overcome. Nathan pulled her closer, their bodies fitting perfectly in the intimate dance they had learned to dance. Promises made in desperation are rarely sacred. They're just shackles disguised as love. But before Rebecca could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the gardens below. Both froze, tense as a violin string about to break. Nathan rose in a fluid movement, taking the pistol he kept in the bedside table drawer. Stay here, he said, but Rebecca was already getting dressed. No, if it's them, I won't hide while you face them alone. They descended the stairs together, Nathan in front with the gun in hand, Rebecca right behind with her heart beating erratically. The house was plunged into darkness, only the moonlight filtering through the windows and creating shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. The front door was ajar. Nathan approached carefully, gesturing for Rebecca to stay behind. A cold breeze entered through the opening, bringing the smell of the New York early morning mixed with something else, incense. In the main hall stood a hooded figure. The man seemed to have stepped directly out of Rebecca's childhood nightmares. Tall, thin to the point of emaciation, dressed in a dark tunic that made him appear more shadow than substance. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but she would recognize those eyes anywhere, small, dark, shining with the fanatical intensity of someone who believes they are fulfilling a divine mission. Brother Samuel, whispered Rebecca, and the name came out like a prayer in reverse. "My dear lost daughter," said the man, his voice echoing through the hall with the resonance of someone accustomed to preaching to multitudes. "How long it's been since we've seen each other." Nathan kept the gun pointed directly at the intruder's chest. "How did you get into my house?" Brother Samuel smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "God opens paths where there is need, my son. And there is great need here," his eyes fixed on Rebecca. "Our daughter needs to return home." "This is my home now," said Rebecca, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "This is the house of your sin, the house where you stained the purity that your saintly mother so valued." Brother Samuel took a step in her direction, completely ignoring the gun pointed at him. "But it's not too late for redemption." "One more step and I put a bullet in your chest," said Nathan coldly. "Violence is the language of those who don't know God," replied Brother Samuel, but he stopped moving. "Rebecca, I need you to know something about your mother, something she asked me to tell you only if you were completely lost." Despite all her instincts screaming not to listen, Rebecca heard herself asking, "What?" "The promise she extracted from you wasn't born just from maternal love. It was born from guilt." Brother Samuel's eyes shone with malicious satisfaction. "Your mother wasn't the saint you think she was. Before joining our community, she worked as, let's say, a woman who sold carnal pleasures. You weren't conceived in sacred love, but in commercial sin." The words hit Rebecca like physical punches. "You're lying. Your mother confessed everything before she died. She begged me to forgive her, to help her ensure that you wouldn't follow the same path. The promise she extracted from you was as much for your salvation as for her redemption." Rebecca felt the world spin around her. Everything she had believed about her mother, about her own origin, about the reasons behind the promise that had defined her life. It was all a lie built on shame and guilt. "Even if that were true," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "it changes nothing. The choice is still mine." "Oh, but it changes everything, my dear daughter," Brother Samuel smiled again, "because now you understand that sin is in your blood. It's your natural inheritance. And only our community can offer the necessary purification." That was when Nathan moved. Nathan didn't use the gun. Instead, he moved with the lethal precision of a predator who had found his prey, covering the distance between himself and Brother Samuel in 3 fluid steps. His free hand closed around the intruder's throat with enough force to cut off his air but not to break bones. "Not yet. You made 2 serious mistakes," said Nathan, his voice low and dangerously controlled. "First, you invaded my house. Second, you tried to manipulate the woman I protect using lies about a dead woman." Brother Samuel tried to speak, but only a gurgle came from his compressed throat. His eyes, however, remained defiant, shining with the fanatical conviction of someone who believes God fights at his side. "Nathan, stop," said Rebecca, but her voice lacked real urgency. Part of her, a dark and vindictive part she didn't know existed, wanted to see that man suffer, wanted to see him pay for all the years of control, for all the nights of nightmares, for having used her mother's memory as a psychological weapon. "Is he lying?" asked Nathan without relaxing his grip. Rebecca hesitated. "I don't know. My mother never talked about her life before the community. Whenever I asked, she would change the subject or become very sad. The admission hurt more than she expected, but even if it's true, it doesn't matter anymore." Nathan slightly loosened the pressure, allowing Brother Samuel to breathe. "It doesn't matter? No?" The certainty in Rebecca's voice surprised even herself. "My mother did what she had to do to survive. If she sold her body to feed her daughter, that doesn't make her less worthy of love or respect. And if she made the promise driven by guilt, that doesn't make the promise more sacred." Brother Samuel managed to whisper, "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Rebecca approached the 2 men, and for the first time since she had met Brother Samuel, she didn't feel afraid of him. "I understand that you use guilt and shame as tools of control. I understand that you transform maternal love into a psychological weapon. I understand that your purity is just another name for oppression. Your mother is in hell because of the sins." Nathan's hand closed again around the man's throat. "Finish that sentence and I break your neck." But Rebecca placed her hand on Nathan's arm, stopping him. "Let him speak. Let him show who he really is." Nathan relaxed his grip once more. and Brother Samuel coughed violently before managing to speak. "Your mother condemned her own soul, and yours too. The blood of a prostitute runs in your veins. Only penance can save you now. My mother saved herself the day she had me," said Rebecca, with a calmness she didn't know she possessed. "She saved herself the day she decided to give me a better life than hers. And I save myself now by choosing not to perpetuate the cycle of shame that you use to control desperate women. You have no choice. You're ours. You always were." It was then that Nathan smiled, and there was something terrible in that expression. "That's where you're wrong, you pathetic fanatic. She's mine now." What happened next was too quick for Rebecca to fully process. Nathan released Brother Samuel only to grab him by the arm and drag him toward the door. There was a brief struggle, some muffled sounds of impact, and then silence. When Nathan returned to the hall, wiping his hands on a handkerchief that he then threw into the fireplace, Brother Samuel had disappeared. "What did you do to him?" asked Rebecca, though she wasn't sure if she really wanted to know the answer. "I sent a message to his sect," said Nathan calmly. "A very clear message about the consequences of bothering what is mine." Rebecca should have felt horror at the implicit violence in Nathan's response. She should have questioned his methods, demanded details, perhaps even considered leaving him for discovering what kind of man she had chosen to love. Instead, she felt protected for the first time in years. "Do you think that will make them give up?" she asked. "No." Nathan approached her, his hands finding her face with the tenderness that strangely contrasted with the violence he had just demonstrated. "But it will make them think twice before trying something like this again. And that gives me time to find a more permanent solution." "Nathan, you don't need to know the details," he said, silencing her protests with a gentle kiss. "You just need to trust that I won't let anyone hurt you or take you from me." And she trusted him. Against all logic, against all common sense, against everything she had learned about dangerous men and their empty promises, Rebecca trusted him completely. "The things he said about my mother," and she began, "true or false?" "They don't change who you are," interrupted Nathan. "They don't change what I feel for you. They don't change the fact that you're the first person in years to make me feel something beyond emptiness." Rebecca nestled in his arms, breathing in the familiar smell of his skin, mixed with the residual aroma of adrenaline and danger. "What do you feel for me?" The question hung between them like an unspoken confession. Nathan remained quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca could feel the battle being waged in his mind. He wasn't the kind of man who allowed himself emotional vulnerabilities, wasn't the type who pronounced words like love with ease. "I feel that you saved me," he finally said. "I feel that without you, I would become exactly the kind of monster my father was, cold, calculating, incapable of any genuine human feeling." "You're not a monster." "No," Nathan laughed softly but without humor. "I just threatened a man with death for disturbing my peace. I have plans to destroy the life of anyone who tries to separate you from me. If I'm not a monster, I'm dangerously close to becoming one." "You're a man protecting what he loves," said Rebecca simply. "There's a difference." "Love." Nathan repeated the word as if he were testing its taste. "Is that what it is?" "I don't know." "You tell me." Nathan held her tighter, as if she might disappear if he relaxed his grip. "I know that the idea of losing you drives me crazy. I know that waking up without you by my side has become unthinkable. I know that I would kill anyone who tried to hurt you without hesitating for a second. That sounds like love to me," whispered Rebecca against his chest. "A dangerous love. The best kind of love, as it..." They remained embraced in the main hall of the mansion, surrounded by the shards of glass that Brother Samuel had left as a calling card, while dawn began to filter through the windows. There was a feeling that they had crossed another threshold, that the external threat had only solidified something that had been growing between them for weeks. But Rebecca knew that this wouldn't be the last advance from the community. Brother Samuel wasn't the type of man who gave up easily, and there were resources in the sect that not even Nathan, with all his fortune, could simply buy off or intimidate. "They'll try again," she said. "Let them try." Nathan's voice carried a dark promise. "Next time I'll be prepared, and if we can't stop them, if one day they find a way to force me to return..." Nathan moved away to look her directly in the eyes. "That will never happen. You're mine now, Rebecca. Mine completely. And I protect what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it warmed her inside. There was something deeply comforting in being desired with such intensity, in being protected with such ferocity. And you're mine too, she said, touching his face. Mine completely. Nathan smiled for the first time since Brother Samuel had appeared, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The renegade virgin and the murderous widower. Perfect for each other. Perfect, agreed Nathan, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of the beginning of a war and the certainty that, regardless of what came, they would face it together. Outside, New York awakened to another day, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within the walls of Blackwood Manor. But for Rebecca and Nathan, that morning marked not just the end of a temporary threat, but the beginning of something deeper and more dangerous than either of them had expected to find. They had found not just passion, but purpose. Not just desire, but destiny, and they were willing to fight for it to the last consequences. 3 weeks passed in relative peace. Nathan had reinforced the security of the mansion, with men who looked more like soldiers than private guards, and Rebecca had begun to believe that perhaps the threat of Brother Samuel had been permanently neutralized. It was a dangerous illusion of security that was shattered on a Thursday morning when she received a call that would change everything. She was arranging flowers in the main hall when the phone rang. Normally she would never answer it. Calls to the mansion were always for Nathan, but something in the persistence of the rings made her pick up the receiver. Blackwood. Residence, she said hesitantly. Rebecca. The voice on the other end of the line made her freeze immediately. It was female, soft, but carrying an authority that she recognized instantly. Sister Magdalene, second in command of the community, and the woman who had been like a surrogate mother after her own mother's death. How did you get this number? Asked Rebecca, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. We have our means, dear, just as we have means to resolve delicate situations, like the one created between you and our brother Samuel. Rebecca's heart raced. What have you done to him? Nothing yet. He's with us, injured but alive, thanks to divine mercy and the medical care we were able to provide. There was a calculated pause in Sister Magdalene's voice. But his situation is grave. The injuries your protector inflicted may have permanent consequences if we don't receive adequate cooperation. What kind of cooperation? You know exactly what kind, my dear daughter. Your return home. Your redemption. Your acceptance of the role God has always planned for you in our community. Her voice gained a more maternal, more manipulative tone. I know you're frightened. I know the temptations of the world have confused you, but it's not too late for salvation. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the old claws of guilt and fear trying to dig into her soul again. But something had changed in her during the weeks with Nathan. She had found not just physical pleasure, but inner strength she didn't know she possessed. I won't come back, she said with more firmness than she felt. Oh, but you will. The softness in Sister Magdalene's voice disappeared completely, because if you don't return, certain information about your protector will reach the proper authorities. Information about his business in Europe, about certain containers that cross borders without adequate documentation, about money that flows through tax havens without proper declaration. Rebecca's blood froze. You have no way of knowing these things. We have eyes and ears in many places, dear, and some of our faithful occupy very interesting positions in government agencies. Sister Magdalene laughed softly. Your Nathan may have money and influence, but we have something more powerful, patience and absolute conviction. Rebecca leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. She knew Nathan had secrets in his business. No man accumulated that kind of fortune being completely clean, but she hadn't imagined that the community had resources to thoroughly investigate his financial life. What do you want exactly? We want you back, assuming the role your saintly mother always dreamed you would occupy, as spiritual leader of the women, as a symbol of redeemed purity, as proof that even the most lost can find their way back to God. Sister Magdalene's voice was charged with religious fervor. And we want him to be left in peace, of course. If you come voluntarily, if you assume your role without resistance, we guarantee that the information about his business will remain with us. And if I refuse, Then tomorrow morning, the FBI will receive a detailed dossier on Mr. Blackwood's activities. The IRS will also receive their copy, as well as certain investigative journalists we know to be very interested in stories about tax evasion and money laundering. There was a dramatic pause. I'm sure you don't want to be responsible for the destruction of the man you claim to love. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. It was a brilliant and cruel move, using her love for Nathan as a weapon against herself. How much time do I have to decide? Until tomorrow at noon. There will be a car waiting for you at the corner of 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue at 12:15. If you don't appear... The call was cut off, leaving Rebecca alone with the sound of her own accelerated breathing echoing through the silent hall. Nathan arrived home 2 hours later and immediately knew something was wrong. Rebecca was in the kitchen, but not preparing dinner as she always did. She was sitting at the table staring at a cup of cold coffee, her eyes red from contained tears. "What happened?" he asked, his voice immediately alert. Rebecca told him everything, the call, the threats, the ultimatum. Nathan listened in silence, but she could see the fury growing in his eyes like a storm forming. "They're bluffing," he said when she finished. "They may have some information, but not enough to cause real damage. Are you sure?" Nathan hesitated just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm Rebecca's worst fears. "Nathan," she said softly, "be honest with me. What can they find if they look?" He sat in the chair beside her, taking her hands in his. "Enough things to make my life very complicated. I'm not a criminal, Rebecca, but not all of my businesses are completely transparent. Taxes are avoided, certain transactions go through. Creative channels. That's how men in my position maintain fortunes the size of mine. So they can really destroy you. They can significantly complicate my existence," admitted Nathan. "But that doesn't mean you should sacrifice yourself for me." Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "It wouldn't be sacrifice. It would be exchange. My freedom for your safety. An exchange I would never accept. You might not have a choice." Rebecca stood and walked to the window that overlooked the gardens. "They know me, Nathan. They know exactly which buttons to push to make me obey. It's always been that way." Nathan approached from behind, enveloping her in his arms. "You're no longer the frightened girl who fled from them 3 years ago. You're a woman who chose her own destiny. I'm a woman in love with a man who doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." "Your mistakes?" Nathan's voice acquired a dangerous hardness. "What mistakes? Being born into a fanatical sect? Having a mother who did what she could to protect you? Having had the courage to flee when you grew up? Having found the strength to surrender to love?" Rebecca turned in his arms, touching his face with trembling fingers. "The mistake of falling in love with you knowing it would bring consequences. Don't you dare call our love a mistake. Then what do you propose? That we flee? That you abandon everything you've built for a woman you've known for just a few months?" Nathan remained quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca could see the war being waged in his mind. She knew his personality well enough to know that he was calculating options, assessing risks, looking for a way out that would save both his fortune and his love. "There's a third option," he finally said. "What?" "We destroy them before they can destroy us." The coldness in his voice sent chills down Rebecca's spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every organization has vulnerabilities. Every fanatic has secrets. And every saint has hidden sins." Nathan smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "They want to play dirty? Let's show them how this game is really played." "Nathan, no." "Why not? They used your love for me against you. Why can't I use their secrets against them?" Rebecca moved away from him, shaking her head. "Because that would make us the same as them. Because I don't want you to become the kind of monster you need to be to defeat them." "Then what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Rebecca looked at the man she loved, saw the fierce determination in his eyes, the willingness to fight against anything that threatened their happiness. And she knew that regardless of what she chose, nothing would ever be the same. "I want one night," she finally said. "One last night to be yours completely, without threats, without blackmail, without fears. Tomorrow we'll face the consequences. But tonight, I want the world not to exist beyond this mansion." Nathan studied her for a long moment, and she could see that he knew exactly what she was really asking. It wasn't just a night of love. It was a farewell. One night, he agreed, pulling her closer, but not a farewell. A promise that we'll find a way to stay together. Rebecca didn't answer, but allowed him to lead her upstairs to the room where they had discovered together the meaning of true passion. She knew she was lying to him, that she had already made her decision. But for one last night, she wanted to live in the illusion that love could conquer everything. Even knowing that, sometimes loving someone means being willing to let them go. Rebecca awoke before dawn, enveloped by the warmth of Nathan's body and the weight of the decision she had made during the early hours. They had made love with a desperate intensity, as if each touch were the last, each whisper a farewell. But when sleep finally overcame her, her mind had found a clarity that the night of passion couldn't overshadow. She wouldn't go to the meeting at the corner of Fifth Avenue, nor would she allow Nathan to transform into the monster he would need to become to destroy their enemies. There was a third option, one that neither of them had considered, because it required the kind of courage that goes beyond heroism, the courage to completely trust in the truth. She left the bed carefully, without waking Nathan, and went down to his office. She knew where he kept the most important documents, had observed his morning rituals enough to know his passwords and codes. If she was going to bet everything on one last play, she needed all the cards on the table. She spent 2 hours gathering information, bank statements, contracts, business correspondence. She wasn't looking for crimes, but for patterns, for connections that could be interpreted in an incriminating way. When she finished, she understood exactly what Sister Magdalene had discovered and how she intended to use this information. Nathan was guilty of sophisticated tax evasion, nothing more. His businesses were legitimate, but structured in a way to minimize taxes through complex legal loopholes. It was the kind of strategy that all rich men employed, but which, in the wrong hands and with the right interpretation, could appear much worse than it really was. It was blackmail based on smoke, but smoke dense enough to cause significant damage. At 8 in the morning, Rebecca made a call. "Federal Bureau, Financial Crimes Section," said the voice on the other end of the line. "I'd like to speak with someone about tax evasion and money laundering," said Rebecca, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. An hour later, she was sitting in a cold, impersonal room before a middle-aged agent who listened to her story with an increasingly interested expression. Rebecca told everything, the religious community, the threats, the planned blackmail, but more importantly, she voluntarily handed over all the documents she had gathered. "Ma'am," said the agent when she finished, "do you understand that you're potentially incriminating someone you claim to love?" "I understand that I'm trusting in justice," corrected Rebecca. "If his businesses are legal, as I believe they are, an official investigation will only confirm that. If they're not, then I was wrong about who he really is." The agent quickly leafed through the documents. "And what about the community that's threatening you?" "Says they're blackmailing an American citizen using illegally obtained information. They're restricting the freedom of an adult through psychological coercion. And I suspect that if you investigate thoroughly, you'll find significant irregularities in how they manage their finances." Rebecca leaned forward. "A religious community that has resources for sophisticated financial investigations certainly has funds that deserve scrutiny." The smile that crossed the agent's face was predatory. "You did the right thing coming here." When Rebecca returned to the mansion, it was almost noon. Nathan was waiting for her in the main hall, dressed in a dark suit and with an expression that mixed fury and despair. "Where were you?" he asked as soon as she crossed the door. "I woke up and you had disappeared. I thought that I had gone to meet them." Rebecca took off her shoes and walked to him with a calmness she didn't feel. "I didn't go. But they'll find out in a few minutes." "Rebecca, what did you do?" She told him everything. The visit to the agency, the documents handed over, the bet she had made on truth and justice. Nathan listened to her in silence, his expression gradually changing from shock to something that might have been admiration. "You bet our freedom on the honesty of the American judicial system," he said when she finished. "I bet our freedom on the truth," corrected Rebecca, "and on the conviction that you're not the criminal they want to make you appear to be." Nathan approached her, taking her face between his hands. "And if you're wrong? If there are things in my businesses that even I didn't realize could be interpreted as crimes?" Then we'll face the consequences together." Rebecca covered his hands with hers. "I prefer to be free and poor with you than rich and enslaved without you." "You're extraordinary," murmured Nathan before, kissing her with a passion that tasted of liberation. The phone rang before they could deepen the kiss. Nathan answered, and Rebecca observed his expression change several times during the brief conversation. "That was my lawyer," he said when he hung up. "The FBI wants to interview me tomorrow morning. Voluntarily for now. And they received an anonymous tip about financial irregularities in a religious community upstate. It seems someone was using donation funds for activities unrelated to religion." Nathan smiled. "Activities like hiring private investigators and small but frequent bribes." Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. So it worked. The first part worked. Sister Magdalene and her friends will have their own concerns for the next few months. Nathan enveloped her in his arms. "But we still need to deal with my investigation." "It will work out," said Rebecca, with a certainty that came from somewhere deep in her soul. "It will work out because it's the right thing to do." And it did. 6 months later, Rebecca was in the garden of the mansion, pruning roses under the golden sun of a New York autumn afternoon. The investigation into Nathan's business had resulted in a significant fine for tax evasion, but no criminal charges. He had voluntarily paid all taxes owed, completely restructured his businesses for total transparency, and emerged from the experience richer in integrity than he had lost in money. Brother Samuel's community had been dissolved by the authorities after an investigation that revealed decades of financial and psychological abuse. Brother Samuel was in prison, Sister Magdalene had fled to Mexico, and the remaining members had been relocated to other religious institutions with government supervision. Rebecca was, finally and completely free. "Mrs. Blackwood," said a voice behind her, and she turned to find Nathan approaching with 2 glasses of champagne and a smile that had become more frequent in recent months. "I still can't get used to that name," she said, instinctively touching the engagement ring he had given 2 weeks before. "You have time to get used to it. A whole lifetime if my plans work out." Nathan handed her one of the glasses. "A toast? To what?" "To the bravest woman I've ever known. To the woman who risked everything for the truth. To the woman who taught me that it's possible to be powerful without being a monster." Rebecca raised her glass, meeting his eyes. "To the man who taught me that it's possible to be loved without being possessed. To the man who showed me that true strength comes from shared vulnerability." The glasses touched with a crystalline sound that echoed through the gardens like a wedding bell. They drank, and then Nathan set down his glass so he could pull Rebecca closer. "No regrets?" he asked, as he had asked so many times in the last few months. "None," she answered, as she always did. "And you?" "Just one." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, surprised. He had never said that before. "I regret taking 42 years to find you," said Nathan, touching her face with the reverence of someone who had finally learned to value true treasures. "I regret every day I lived without knowing what it was like to love someone who loves me back, without fear, without conditions, without reservations." "Then let's not waste another day," whispered Rebecca, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. The kiss tasted of fulfilled promises and possible futures. It tasted of chosen freedom and conquered love. It tasted of 2 souls who had found in each other not just passion, but completeness. When they separated, the sun was setting over New York, painting the sky with shades of gold and scarlet that reflected in the mansion's windows like divine blessing. The city breathed around them, millions of lives unfolding in their own journeys of love and loss, dream and reality. But there, in that garden perfumed by roses and lavender, 2 people had found something rare and precious. A love that had survived the test of fire, a passion that had grown stronger under pressure, a union that had proven to be indestructible even in the face of forces that tried to separate them. "Ready for what comes next?" asked Nathan, gesturing toward the mansion that was no longer